Abba, oh, what a marvelous day it is. Father, in your kingdom, every day is a marvelous day. Father, thank you for bringing us out of darkness and into your marvelous light. I thank you, Abba, for the opportunity to gather here with my fellows here and Eric as our leader, our teacher. Father, he takes a great responsibility to bring us your message each and every week. And I thank you, Father, for him. I thank you, Father, for you sustaining us until bringing us here again this week. I ask you, Father, that your word go out, that it not return void. And I pray, Father, for those who are hearing this message today, that your word will deeply penetrate into their soul and that it will bring forth great fruit. It's in Yeshua's name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, here we are at the letter QOOF, which is the purple column going down here, lining up with the binoculars, the sickle harvesting a grain in the illustrations, and the pillar fire, pillar smoke, question mark, exclamation point here in the Mishkan pattern. And up at the top, when I made this chart, there's no Greek, but I believe there was an ancient Greek. Can't remember what it was called. There was a couple letters that the Greek, like the digamma, I think the other one was the QOOF. The interesting thing, just so you understand about at the top, we're going over the chart here, and QOOF is kind of this overview, kind of like a mushroom shape. Think of it like the propeller of a helicopter, vertical shaft, and then the prop going around that lifts you up. So the QOOF, like the letter Q, vertical, and then the round part. You could think of it as singular and plural, kind of a juxtaposing of both those things. But so up here at the top, the very top is the English. And like here, you get I, J, and Y all came out of the letter Yod. The letter Q came out of the QOOF, but it doesn't show the Greek. Over here at the letter Vav, it's where we came up with F. It's the sixth letter right after E. E, F, G, Hey, Vav, Zion. So Zion became the letter G. And it's like there's if you look at this ancient Greek way of writing the letter Zeta, it's almost like two circles connected, almost like eyeglasses. And it's like, well, what does that got to do with the letter G or the letter Zion? And it's like, well, if you're going to plow in a garden, you could take a one prong like a hoe, or you could take a two prong or multiple blades. But the simplest multiple blade is two discs hooked together with a yoke that you could then drag through the soil, which became the shape of the letter G. And here you'll see that it's similar to that, but it's the letter that we would think of looks like a Z and is pronounced like Z or Z if you're of a British inclination. But it's actually a plowshare is the simplest form, but it's drawn like basically an axe. So it's essentially a weapon which is used to cut something off or cut something open. Like the plowshare rips open the earth. An axe or a knife, or it doesn't have to be an axe, it could be any weapon, adorned with weapons. Something about weaponry. So what I'm saying is that the fact that Yeshua was put to the Roman flail where they just shredded his flesh. There's some accounts that say he basically was dehumanized. His back looked like a hamburger. Quite often you'll see a statue of Jesus hanging on the cross, and he's got one or two little lines on him with a little trickle of blood coming out. And Mel Gibson in the movie The Passion of the Christ had it much more extreme, and there are those who say that it was even more extreme than that. But the same way that a plowshare is going to rip open the earth. Hey, look at this man, Hey Vav Zion, Zion Hey and Zion ALEF-TAV mean this. So this man that we put to the weapon, adorned, like the halo is this adornment, an ornamentation as an illustration of the significance of a certain character, a certain individual in a painting. It's all Zion stuff. But this letter Vav has a few different ways to draw it. And the typical way that most times on people's rendering, what I see, not very many people use the Vav in this shape. It was a genuine shape, but the style is what you'd say was a little line that curves and goes horizontal, and then a longer line extending down, and then a diagonal. Well, if you distort that a little bit, that's where the English letter F comes in. So you can see that the English comes right out of the Hebrew for the F and then the E, but it says here, lost number 6, sequence alters. So what I mean by that up there is that in Greek, there was this letter called digamma, and it was the 6th letter. But they stopped using it in ancient times. I think it was like at least close to 500 BC, which is when the Hebrew, when Daniel and Ezekiel and all those guys were kicking around, Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle. Well, if you get rid of one letter back here, then the 7th letter becomes the 6th letter, and the 8th letter becomes the 7th. So if you start saying, what's the number value of the Greek letters? As soon as you remove one, well, the Greek letter eta looks like the letter H, which was the 8th letter lining up with the het. I mean, everything was exact matching. But then when you remove one letter, everything shifts. And so the number value or the counting of the gematria value, as you're looking at Greek, suddenly doesn't make any sense because they dropped one letter and then they dropped this other letter in the position of the Q. The Zadi just doesn't show up at all in Greek, thus neither Latin nor English. It's just in Hebrew. And so like we talked about the letter Zadi last week, Zadi lining up with the Ark of the Covenant, the Kadosh Kodashim. And in the Ark of the Covenant was the 10 Commandments, the rock that was etched with the finger of Elohim. So you could say, well, because this is my thinking here, rationalizing the understanding so I could hold on to it, graphically have something of tangibility. Because Zadi, the word Zad is a hunter, Zadi is righteous, Zadik would be a righteous one, Zadika, righteousness. It's a sprout, like it's a picture of the resurrection. And that's only in Hebrew. It didn't pick up in the other languages. Why? Because there's something exclusive about the Hebrew. And even though the other language can morph, permutate, develop out of the Hebrew, it seems interesting that I'm going to say Elohim did it. He retained the Zadiness of the Hebrew just to the Hebrew and embedded that as almost like a conceptual riddle, embedded it in the letter Zadi. Now, I could say, well, look at the letter Psalmic, that doesn't transfer, but yeah, but the sound of the Psalmic and the sheen, see, sheen can be pronounced as S or SH, either one. Psalmic is just the S sound, but it's duplicated with the sheen. Well, there's a different value, essence of meaning to the Psalmic. So the same with if the Vav is pronounced as a V, and the bet can be pronounced as a B or a V. Ivarekika is the first sounding word in the Aaronic benediction, Yivarechecha Yahuah. So he will bless you. Well, that's the V sound, but the word blessing is bet resh kaf. So we could say Ibarukaka or Barakaka. But I've always heard people say Ivareka. Just what I'm saying. Now, some people might say, this is the way you do it. Everybody else is an idiot. Everybody else is wrong. I've heard a lot of people talk that way. There was a guy that I just saw a little clip of the other day, and there were these two guys up in, I think it was Seattle, a number of 10 years ago, say Caleb and Rob, and both of them very scholarly, and they were talking about the language and stuff. And they don't have that show anymore, but the other guy, Caleb, still has a show, and that was I saw a little clip. But anyway, he was saying how, where'd you learn Hebrew? What school did you go to? Who did you learn from? He did. And so he knows what's going on. And it's like, and if you didn't and you have no proof, then shut up. It's like, well, wait a second. He had a bit of an attitude, maybe rightly so. I don't know the man. I'm not criticizing him, but I'm just defining his position. But I'd done a video probably 10 years ago called The Butcher or Butcher Boy. The word for butcher, I can't remember what it is offhand in Hebrew, but it's basically to cut things apart into pieces. Like you take a piece of meat and you cut it into pieces. The word sif, Samik Yod Pei, is a swordsman, which also, like a surgeon, might be some way of. But Caleb and Rob were talking about me one time, and they said, if you want just to go to the store and get some meat to throw on the barbecue, okay, go to the butcher. But if you need surgery, don't go to the butcher. You go to the trained medical doctor, the surgeon. And so they were saying, like, well, if you want to learn this language, don't go to the butcher. And my point in making that video was completely humorous, but also completely serious. My point is to say, if you know what these 22 letters mean, you know the whole language. Now, somebody could say, stop right there. That's not true, because language has syntax and sentence structure. And when you go to grammar school, which is what in America would be called elementary school, you basically learn how to read and write and how to count and add and subtract. You know, the basic fundamental literacy, as our nation holds of value, would be just read and write and know how to add and subtract. Everything else is bonus on top, superfluous, putting ice cream on top of your cake. But if you just need the cake, then that's the literacy, which is literacy used to be just for the elite. Slaves and women and undesirables weren't even allowed to learn how to read. So for us to think, well, you're an idiot if you can't read, that's not true. You're common. Being able to read was mystical for a while. And then it was just the privilege, the elite, especially if you learn multiple languages. But this whole idea of saying, hey, let's learn how to read Hebrew, I think rather easily, is in my sense of perspective, an incredible gift that Elohim has provided us these days on the face of the earth to say, learn how to read my language. And it's not a matter of paying a bunch of money and getting a course online or going to some university or getting a doctorate in language or whatever that maybe these other guys have. And it's like, well, that's great for them. I mean, they probably know some stuff. But what I'm trying to show here has nothing to do with that. Just so you know, I'm not trying to teach Hebrew like a regular, what you might expect to be an academic class in learning the language of Hebrew. That's not what this is. The whole idea of the word eriktology is the word spelled ayin resh kaf, pronounced erik or charek, like the ayin, like the eyeball, it's a soft guttural from the way back in your throat, like you're gargling. If you had water in your mouth and you're going, oh, letting the air bubbles come up through the liquid, that's technically a moderate form of that is the way the IN is pronounced. But the IN can also be pronounced as a an E, a U, an O. It's in the place of the letter O, like Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun. Remember, it doesn't pick up the Samic. Ayin Pei is KLMNOPQRST. That's the English equivalent. So Ayin Resh Kaf means order and row. Well, if you lay out a garden, you could just have like a wild, what they might call an English garden. Or somebody was telling me the other day, there's something called xeriscaping. Now, landscaping is where you take the land and you scape it. What does that mean? Well, you design it and you give it a practical, functional use, whether it's for visual or use, maybe. And if you lay out a garden, you might think, oh, I'm just going to put in a few things that I like. But if you know about plants that deter pests, you know, if you put a certain one of these next to one of those, you'll keep this one healthier, putting in marigolds. And it's like, instead of having to use toxic poison, pesticides. And then you might say, well, I don't want people running on me. Maybe you put certain plants with spikes on the leaves or thorn bushes around it as a protection, to, like a fence, to keep the rest of it from being trampled. You could do that. But see, to lay something out with intention. So when the word Eric means order and row, column, line, column, well, it just so happens that's the layout of this chart. Here's some rows, here's some lines, and everything's kind of interfaced with each other. The concept of index, the concept of how do you lay out a lexicon? How would you set up a museum? Some sort of scientific display. If somebody comes into the museum, you have an introduction. Right at the entrance, let me tell you what this museum display is about, and then you maybe do you organize it by time? This is the oldest stuff, and this is the newest stuff. Do you organize it by groups of like if it's art? Do you say this is Art Deco and this is Art Nouveau and this is different types of painting mediums or sculptures? Or I mean, you know, you'd have to, if you're the curator of the museum, you'd have to make a decision. How are we going to set this up so it would be interesting, it would be fun, it would be, you might say, develop logically? If somebody were to walk through not knowing anything, they start here and they end up getting it, not only appreciating just for the visual, but also getting an understanding. So if you're going to set up a dictionary, or if you're going to set up a lexicon, or if you're going to set up, like in a library, archives, registry, if you're working for, say, the county, and you have a bunch of records that need to be kept, it's like, how are you going to file these things? Well, let's see, I'm going to put these matters over here and those matters there. I'm going to make these alphabetical, but I'm going to make these not alphabetical. I'm going to make them according to dollar value. Or the person organizing. See, if you stick the letter noon behind a word, that basically, or sometimes if you put a mem in front of the word, that essentially means this is the one engaged in the action of doing this. That's just, now somebody who really knows the language might say, this guy's making stuff up, shut up. And it's like, no, listen, I can show you words in the Stone Tanakh, let's say, that where they've been translated a certain way. And if you look at the spelling of the word, and then you look at other words, similar translation, and look, what is the similarity in the spelling? That's all I've done. I've not taken a class to learn Hebrew. And it's not about me, and it's not about what I know. I'm pointing at, look how the language works, which anybody can do. And you can look at the letters and look in like Klein's dictionary, and it'll tell you most of the letters The ancient pictograph form was a picture of a whatever, like you could look at the mem in modern, it's like, what does that look like? And it's like, well, that might almost look like an animal, maybe the head and the neck and a humped back and maybe sitting down, or but that looks like water. And so the little zigzag on the top of the mem and then the undercurl, that's a wave action. The turbulent foam breaking of the wave here, and then the curl underneath where you go surfing right there. I can see that in the mem. The letter Samic looks like a trunk of a tree with branches, an old sailing ship, the mast with 3 yardarms. What else do you see in there? An antenna? See, just to sit and stare and look at it and say, where does my mind naturally grow? If I look at the eye, I can say, well, that looks like an eyeball. If I draw it elliptical versus round, it looks more like a human eye, but other animals have more round eyes. It's just an eye. It doesn't matter whose eye it is, whether or not there's a dot in the middle. If it's just a circle that looks like the letter O, like here, you might think certain things. If you look at that, you'll think different things. It could be like an avocado. There's a stem and a round elliptical sort of body to the fruit with a seed in the middle. It doesn't have to be an avocado. It can be a raspberry, or it doesn't matter what it is. It's just a fruit hanging with a little bit of a stem. Hay literally is a mouth, or that which opens. So the mouth of a river opens to the sea. So it's not necessarily a biological mouth. It's just something that opens. Do you understand that? If you understand that, then your understanding is open. So now the pay has to do with your understanding, not necessarily a river going to the sea or your mouth opening to eat the fruit. And if ayin has to do with understanding, then pay following ayin could be read as well. Your understanding's open, and then zadi is a sprout. So then once you understand and go, Eureka, which means I found it, and spelled E-U-R-E-K-A. Well, wait a minute. E-U, those are 2 vowel sounds that come right out of the letter ayin. Then there's the R-E-K-A. And in Hebrew, the vowels were kind of dropped in. So drop out the E and the A, and you got E-U-R-K. Well, that's ayin resh kaf. What's ayin resh kaf? Word erik, as in eriktology, where it says, I get it. I see how it all works. That moment of enlightenment, of comprehension, of you getting it, not just, yes, I remembered certain things and I wrote them down so I could pass the test, but all of a sudden there's this other level, a breakthrough of now it's yours. Eureka, got that. I see it. So that flourishing of the opening of the understanding, I can see as the zadi of the pay of the ayin. Well, where'd the ayin come from? Something about the samic. Well, a samic, if it's drawn like a vine with branches, what does that got to do with? Well, a vine and branches is supposed to bear fruit. And remember the fig tree that wasn't bearing fruit, and Yahushua was walking past, and he cursed it, and it withered up. And it's like, gosh, why'd he curse it? I don't know. There's probably something more going on in that story. But the idea is, well, what's metaphorically the figure of the samic? Well, is that supposed to be the house of Israel bearing fruit? Other people have likened that to, you might say, the house of Israel, the Jews, the 12 tribes. And because they weren't listening to Yahuah's voice and wouldn't do what he said, he cursed them and kicked them out, and to hell with you. Literally, it's like, okay, you're not getting in the kingdom. You're getting banished from the land, and in the by and by, in the hereafter, you're going to be just pushed off into the lake of fire and get out of here. Nobody knows, nobody cares, nobody wants you. You're just a disgusting, loathsome people group. Is that metaphorically what happened when Yahushua, however you want to call his name, that's another matter, but when he cursed the fig tree because there was no fruit on it? If we want to go there, we could say, well, then we better make sure that we're bearing fruit. Well, if I say, and I'm trying to show a little bit of a problem here, if I say that ayin pe zadi is our understanding opening, and then we go, aha, what's that got to do with me bearing fruit? See, all of a sudden it jumps into the context of the metaphor. There was a guy, well, quite some years ago, came up with this thing called the ALEF-BEIT song, which maybe I should go through that here, but let me finish my sentence. See, we're talking about the chart. The ALEF-BEIT song is not on the chart. The ALEF-BEIT song was back in like 2006, I think, or something, but maybe 2007. But the point is, this other I had sung this song, and this other guy who's a real musician took it and modified it, which is okay. But what I noticed is that through his verses or stanzas, he jumped around in perspective. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. In my sense of art, artistic license, poetic license, you should hang on to one point of view and keep it consistent. Now, you don't have to. You can have this point of view, like what I see, and then jump over here and say, what does this person see, or that see, or what's the. But when you jump all over the place, then if somebody listening is like, I don't know what I'm hearing, I don't know what I'm. It's to me, it's hard to follow on a certain track. So if I were to say, look, I'm going to tell the story from my perspective. This is what I see. This is what I saw. This is what I thought. This is what I expect. This is what I. Okay, then if somebody else say, well, yeah, but from this perspective, or if I was to say, I'm going to start talking about what the letters are as if they were objects. Okay, so that's the letter bet. Keep it consistent. What is the object? Each letter as an object, as a noun. Yeah, but some letters are more like verbs. So Gimel as a verb action. But if I jump back and forth, and it's like, well, as long as you know you're jumping back and forth. But if all of a sudden I say, well, QOOF is an overview, let's throw that in. Compared to what? The basic object? Well, is that your overview of the basic object? Or it's like, can you keep it consistent? And this guy had written a version of the alphabet song, which I thought was jumping all over the place. And I tried to say, well, if you keep a consistent reference, it'll be easier to follow and know what you're talking about. And I think he was disturbed that a mere peasant should try to instruct a genuine professional musician how to write a song. I think he took that as, I believe he took it as very rude. But what I'm saying is this idea of order, row, archives, registry. How do you set a table? Apparently, there's competitions for arranging a banquet table, like at a state fair. And somebody will get certain plates and what they call chargers and mats. And how do you set up the glasses and the silverware or goldware, or how do you arrange things? And people go and they set up a table, and it's judged. Somebody will come in and decide, well, does this look better? Is this more functional? And it's like, who cares? You're just sitting down to eat. It's an art form. And I know some people that do an incredible, spectacular. It's not a job; it's an art to set a banquet table. The Inn at Knowles Hill in Sonora, California, is just spectacular. Different variations of it, and it's like it's just the Inn at Knowles Hill, Knowles, like Knoll, like no to know. Anyway, my point is, I've filmed a number of things you'll see from that place down there. It's a beautiful place. But what I'm saying is that the individual mind seeing the connection and appreciating it. I'm not trying to invade and say you're wrong. I'm just trying to, like I was telling that guy, it's not that he's wrong, but if he kept a consistent order, it'd be easier for me to follow. And he might see something different if he tried to keep a consistent order. But if somebody's just saying, oh, I get it, this is this and this is that and that's that. Okay, boom. You could say Aleph is an ox. Okay, bet that's a house. Okay, Gimel, camel, okay, Dalet, door. Okay, now what do those four letters have to do with each other? Ox, house, camel, door. How do I make up a story? Tying them together. The ox got in the house And so did the camels, so we have to open the door and let them out. They say if you let the, apparently there's some Bedouin saying that, how does a camel get inside the tent? As soon as he sticks his nose under the edge of the tent, the rest of them is going to get in there. So you got to have that. Don't even let the camel stick his nose under the tent. What's that got to do with the ox in the door? It's like, see, what I'm saying is that you can sit there and say, this stuff doesn't make sense, or you can try to make it make sense. And the way that you make it make sense develops your understanding. Pezadi, Ayin Pezadi. And that's perfectly subjective. That's each person's task at the matter. There's some people that says, gosh, this stuff is kind of bothersome. They tried a little bit, they seem to get it, and it's like either it seems like it goes nowhere, or it's not worth the while, or it's too much effort, or it's like, blah, blah. What am I supposed to do with this? And I've seen people over the last 20 years, some people pick it up and drop it, and other people pick it up and be totally enthused. Well, I could look at the letter QOOF and say, well, it's the round part and this singular straight part underneath it. So I could say, well, if you inflated a balloon with something like, say, helium, where it's going to rise up in the air, and then you had a string or a rope or a basket hanging underneath and you're going to go up, that's kind of a picture of the QOOF. See, Zadi, that looks like a stick with a flourish. Well, if you're trying to light a fire and you've got a bunch of sticks in the fireplace, once they actually catch and ignite, now the flame is bonded to the stick. Okay, that's kind of like a picture of the Zadi. But then what? Well, then the smoke goes up into the air, and then if it's really burning, then you get a cloud of smoke going up into the air. Well, that's the QOOF. So the QOOF is the picture after the Zadi thing happens. So if the Zadi is a picture of a bird putting up its wing, why is that a bird putting up his wing? Because the word oof, which is ayin pei or ayin vav pei, is the word bird, is the word for putting out your wing. And Samik can be seen as not just a mast with 3 yard arms, but it could be think of a dragonfly. You've got the body of the dragonfly like this vertical, and then you've got these other two wings sticking out as it were on both sides. That's kind of a Zadi shape. So that's kind of like the Zadi shape is kind of like the picture of the adult form of the insect, a winged insect. Well, the word for Samik ayin literally means to branch out, to diversify, like a manifold, like on a car engine, you'll have, let's say it's a 6-cylinder car, so there's 6 ports where exhaust is going to be coming out, and the manifold collects all those 6 in 6 tubes and collects them down into one and sends it back to the back end of the car to be belched out as exhaust. That's the collective manifold, but that branching of one turning into however many cylinders you'd have, that's literally the meaning of Samik ayin, to branch out and diversify. Well, you could say the Protestant church certainly branched out and diversified. Languages after the Tower of Babel branched out and diversified. So how do I plug those concepts into this? And if ayin pei is not only the adult form, but the bird who sprouts its wings, like that picture of the branched out feathers, well, the QOOF is then, in my thinking, actually becoming airborne, making the flight, like the balloon going up. Okay, so for Yeshua to jump out of the grave, think about that. What did he say when he first stepped out of the grave? Well, were the soldiers conscious or unconscious when he stepped out? Nobody was there. If he came out Saturday night, by Sunday morning, he was already gone. And I remember hearing many years ago in some Sunday school class, the teacher asked the kids, what do you think Yeshua said when he stepped out of the grave? Think about that for a moment. It's like, Was somebody there to write it down? And what profound expression would he say? And one little girl said, I know. It's like, ta-da! Haha, that's pretty funny. Well, the interesting thing about toda, tada, literally is that word that means give thanks, give praise, resounding, reverberating. So see, even in English, ta-da! What's the word in Hebrew? Toda! Hodu is a derivative form of give thanks, give praise, resounding, echoing confession of sin, and just saying what is really going on. You could say a vocalization of truth is kind of a definition of Todah. And even though it was some little girl's imaginary, ta-da, look, I did it, that's where that expression comes from. Like, Eureka, I found it. That's pure Hebrew. Todah is like, wow, da, Eureka. It's kind of an aspect of Eureka. Here it is. This is the display. And remember, last week we were talking about where Yahuah said, I don't want your slaughter offerings. I want your offering of Todah. That's what he said. So every time you say, well, hey, we're supposed to be doing what the Torah instructions tell us, and people say, kill an animal, it's like, he said right there in Psalm 50 and other places, numerous places, he said, it's not about the killing the animals. Yeah, but he did say the killing was the animals was forever. I'd have to look back at that and say, I'd be inclined to say, well, yeah, you're right. But then it's like, wait a minute. These days, I don't necessarily trust the English interpretation of just about any Bible verse. Some of them look perfectly clear, perfectly clear. As a matter of fact, we're going to look at one here. Well, I'll finish talking about this and I'll get to this other one. That was Genesis 33, verse, what was it, 4, about Jacob and Esau meeting. Genesis 33, 4. Looks pretty clear what it says, but we'll take a look at that in Hebrew and see something else. What I'm trying to say about understanding the language and about the word Eric and about that guy Caleb saying, if you didn't learn Hebrew from a legitimate Hebrew college, university, get a doctorate in it like he did, then shut up and go away, basically. What I'm saying is that if anybody takes the time to learn these letters, that's the language. That's Hebrew. Everything else is grammar, what you learn going to grammar school. I remember, in fact, was it like fifth and sixth grade? How are you? There was a certain word they used. You take a sentence and you say, this is the subject, this is the predicate, this is the noun, this is the verb, this is the adjective, and you break the whole thing down. And you were tested on, here's a sentence, let's see how you do this. And it's like, you're not going to pass the class unless you can tell them this is exactly the way you structure a sentence properly in English, in America. And this is the way you spell words. And if you don't, we're going to fail you. And if you fail, you have to repeat this grade of class. And back then, it was a big deal. Not so much anymore, from what I understand. But what I'm saying is, this study of Hebrew is not that kind of study. So I was telling somebody the other day, remember, there's an overview, QOOF, kind of an overview of things. I'm trying to today, just, I'm trying to get to a perspective of a bunch of different things about this chart and about the understanding of the language. So I've mentioned before to people who are good Christians, I said, I'm willing to bet you already know the language. You just don't know you know. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, let me tell you. Okay, you believe, like in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Well, where did he come from? He doesn't tell us that, because the letter Aleph is silent, and the word Bereshit, translated Genesis, or in, as in the beginning, Rosh is the beginning, Be-Rosh would be in beginning, or at the condition of the origin, if Rosh is the original. So if Genesis 1:1 starts with the letter Bet, The aleph isn't there because the aleph is inferred, it's silent. In other words, I could sit there and say, now here's the mystery, the fundamental mystery of the aleph-bet. Aleph isn't going to tell you what aleph is. Aleph is silent. But it expresses what it is in the other 21 letters. Well, that's like Dr. Seuss's book, The Cat in the Hat. Or The Cat in the Hat Comes Back. I'm not sure which one it was. But the cat had this hat, and he took off, and there's another cat with another hat. And then he takes off his hat, and there's another cat with another hat, and he takes off his hat, there's another cat with another hat, and they get smaller and smaller, and they're all to the alphabet. There's cat A, and then there's cat B, and then there's cat C. Well, that's kind of like this. In the aleph is all the other letters, and in the bet is all the other letters, and in the gimel is all the other letters, and the dalet, all the other letters. And it's like, come on, okay, that's a concept, but what does that mean? How does that work? So for Dr. Seuss, who wrote that book and used that as the little gimmick for the story, okay, well, it just sets up the concept in your mind. It's like, yeah, but how does it work? I don't know how it works, but it worked in that story with the parents are gone and the kids and let the cat in, all these other cats mess up the whole house, and then cat Z, the little one, cleans up the whole house just as the parents walk up the sidewalk to come to the front door. Well, it's a cute little story, but it's like, no, wait a minute. How would it work here? I'm going to try to illustrate that. If aleph is silent, it expresses itself in all the other letters. So what that means is we're going to start with bet, in which case this is bet is the first letter. That's one. Yeah, but bet's number two, because bet as two, bet can be used as a prefix letter, meaning in, on, with, among, through, and against. See, every one of those words, thinking about them in English, is one thing in reference to another. If something is in, then you've got an environment, you have an object. The object is in. If it's on, here's an object, and the other one is on top of the object. With, there's one object, and the other one's with. If it's through, there's this. See, it's also for the price of or in the condition of. So now you have this concept of a price, and you say this object is the price. So you've always got these two considerations for the letter bet. But if aleph is one, see, all we know of what is called God, Elohim, is that it's unknowable. It's if this is the universe that we're in, hey, there's the letter bet, then the God concept, the Elohim, is on the other side of the universe, the maker of the universe. And if the universe is essentially time and space, then that's a manufactured thing, time and space. So if Elohim's on the other side of the manufactured universe, there is no time, there is no space. He invented both time and space. That's his alephness. That's the nature of aleph, like this big strong ox. How strong? So strong that nothing can stop it. Okay, how big is that? So big that nothing else is bigger. But see, those are bet concepts used to look back and imagine what the alephness is, or to say, look at anything else in the bet and say, we're going to use this as a model. So it's so big, bigger than everything else, that nothing else is bigger, but the aleph is even bigger than the bet. So we're going to say the aleph is stronger and more powerful. See, so as you start thinking of aleph compared to bet, it's kind of all we're given is metaphorically, look at how these things compare to each other. And that's what you got to do in your own mind. And if you sit there and say, I think I got it, what I would encourage you to do, now try to explain it to somebody else. I knew a guy that was in a role of like a professor once, and he says, a student may understand something. You say, explain it to me. Well, I can't really explain it, but I understand it. And it's like, if you can't explain it, you might understand it to a certain level, but you don't fully understand it. Try to explain it. Any one of these things that you think you understand, try to explain to somebody else. Find somebody else who, just so you know, it's pretty hard to find an audience. So one thing I've done over the years, it's like, well, see, teachers generally get paid. Yeah, but then you have to have students who want to pay in order to get taught. Nobody knows they want this. So there's various times, quite a few times actually, where I've had somebody working for me doing construction work or something. It's like, tell you what, I'm not going to tell you you have to stand here, but I'm paying you to stand here. So now stand here and I'm going to tell you about this stuff. So I'm paying for my own audience. Many hours I've done that. And it's like, well, hey, I don't want to hear this stuff. No, you're here to help me. You're here to help me dig a hole or paint a house or build a wall. But today you're helping me listen as I explain this to you. And it's like, well, that's stupid. No, that's not stupid. I think that's a genius thing to do, because if I can't find an audience, and I need an audience so that I can exercise trying to explain something. And if the guy says, like, I'm on the clock, I'm earning, $20 an hour, $40 an hour, or whatever it is. And it's like, is that worth it to me? If it's worth it to me, then it really is a useful expense. What I'm saying is, find a way to make this sprout in your own consciousness. If you have to hire somebody to listen to you, or if you have to turn it into a game that you can teach children, or if you want to try to write a book and then have somebody else read it and make sure it's logical, or write a song, whatever you got to do to make this thing sprout, take wing and lift off. You see that concept of, I get it. I think I get it. The wing is sprouted, but can I get airborne? Can I get some lift? What I'm saying is that this process of understanding it to the point of now I can explain it is essentially the Zodi QOOF area. So if you can sit there and say, I understand Aleph, the silent letter, and some people say it's not silent. It's like, okay, but depending on who you listen to, Aleph is silent. Kind of sounds like an of an E sound, but it's actually by default silent, and it's just kind of thrown in there to give it some start. But if that's the first letter, but it's actually number 2, that kind of throws you off, like the daggama in the Greek. And it's like, well, then everything else shifts in its position. There's something about that too. If you ponder that, you'll have to figure out how to organize it. That's my point. If everything is in order and row, and there's a reason why the first letter is actually the second letter. Some people I've heard say, there was supposed to be an Aleph, so let's put it back in there. Ha, those lying scribes, they took it away. And it's like, not necessarily. There might be an embedded riddle. So you can think and you can read somebody say, hey, that's what they did. The scribes lied. It was supposed to start with an Aleph. Doggone it, those guys. And then if you believe that, now you're run off with some spurious nonsense. Maybe it's true. Or maybe it's a spur of nonsense, a scion of understanding. So you have to sit there and say, gosh, where do I find the truth of this? If you think that these alphabet letters are of human origin, and this is what scholars think, this is the official scholarly perspective. Let's say cavemen or wandering nomads invented objects that borrowed them from the Egyptians and said, okay, here, the Egyptians had these hieroglyphics, and so we're going to gather these things up and assign a pictorial value to important objects in our life. Hey, an ox, a house, a camel, a fish, the skeleton of a fish, an eyeball, a mouth, a fish hook, Zodi. Okay, now somebody turned those into letters and said, hey, let's spell words. And literally they say, evolving over time, that's how the Phoenician Semitic alphabet became. Okay, so if you think that, then you're going to say that, and the back half of a rat carcass, a dead rat might, give you something to throw in the water as a fish bait for something else. I'm just saying, it's just like, what? What does that have to do with anything? I don't believe that at all. I believe these letters come from Elohim, that he himself designed and orchestrated and placed these letters in their position. And that is what this study is. That Elohim, the creator of heaven and earth, the one who refers to himself as the Aleph, which means you guys are going to start waking up being born on the face of the earth, in the bet, in the universe, in a body. I'm going to give you your own Aleph consciousness in your own body. And then who am I? I'm the guy that made this happen. And what? Where'd you come from? Where's this going? You don't know. You don't know. That's part of what this earth is. All you have is present consciousness. You don't know where it came from and where it's going, kind of like the wind. And somebody's just talking about that earlier. But what I'm saying is, by design of the Mishkan pattern, it's kind of like here we are in this space, but by design of this whole thing, we don't know what's on the other side of Aleph, nor do we know what's on the other side of Tav, but we're given this to deal with. Okay. That's kind of a QOOF picture also. See, the QOOF talked about in previous letters about this. Somebody said it's a kind of a Kabbalah notion, but the Zimzum, which is to say, if everything is one, echad, unified, the Aleph state, where there is no other, there's no universe yet. And so the Elohim, whatever it is, they is what we don't know, it's undescribable, silent. But if everything is a oneness, then somehow, like a picture of a uterus womb, he creates this space that can be inflated, like the big part, injecting a straw into a balloon and inflating it, blowing up. That's a picture of the QOOF. But that itself is a picture of how the universe got to exist within the realm of something that doesn't have time and space, that's completely different than this universe, how this universe exists. And if you see the letter QOOF, you can kind of see how that works. But if that picture of the letter QOOF is how we made bet, why is the QOOF the 19th letter? Why isn't the letter QOOF way up here? Because there's another reason for the alphabetic order. But to me, what I see there is, okay, somehow that each, like the cat in the hat, each letter is in every other letter is in that letter, but this doesn't work, is that everything's in Aleph and then everything's in Bet, and so the only thing that's in Shin is Tav. No, all the letters are in each letter. Somehow, the way to understand what one individual letter is, you have to see all the other letters in association to it, which is kind of what this whole top part of the chart is about. What that means is, in order to fully understand each one letter, you got to understand all the letters. And in order to understand all the letters, you got to understand each one of the letters. It's another catch-22, meaning there's this and that. But you can't have this unless you have that, but you can't have that unless you have this. It's kind of like ayin dalet hyphenated with ayin tav. And so, explaining that again, which is written down in the bottom right corner, ayin dalet is the word until, ayin tav is the word for time. In fact, ayin tav hey means right now. It's like, well, wait a minute, hey means to express or reveal the fifth letter, but why does ayin tav hey mean right now? Because that's the way the language works. You put a hey on something and it's somehow an expression of time. Well, what's time? Time is a theory. Does it really exist? But what we have is right now. What time is it? Right, it's now. So I'm telling you, that's the way the Hebrew language works. It's a concept. Ayin tav hey is right now. Ayin tav is time. But tav is a mark, a sign, a symbol, a flag, a glyph, a shape of one of the letters. And ayin means understanding. So to understand the shape of the letters is ayin tav. Yeah, but it means time. Now I could sit there and make something up and say, well, in this realm of space and time, we can understand the letters. Does that mean that's where it came from? I don't know, but I can see that. I can understand that in my own mind of thinking. What is ayin tav? Ayin literally means to comprehend, to understand, to get it. And tav literally is a mark, a sign, a symbol, like a flag, like a logogram, like a graphic glyph that means something. If I draw a circle with a line, it's like, hey, that's a musical note. It's just a circle and a line, but everybody is agreed that's a musical note. Whether there's lines of a musical staff or not, You know a note when you see a note, because that's embedded within the collective consciousness. Okay. So is every one of these letters. And I believe it's that way because Elohim, the creator Aleph, made it that way on purpose. Now, that's the premise of this entire ALEF-BEIT. So every one of the, let's say you've got a doctorate in Hebrew, and you don't think so? Believe your own stuff. I'm just telling you, that's the premise of understanding this. You go to take any Hebrew class online, and I don't think they're going to tell you that. But if that's true, see, now I have to say, if that's true, I believe it's true. If it's true, what it means is that Elohim himself, itself, they self, whoever the God, the deity, the creator of the universe, the Aleph of the Bet, intentionally made all 22, and they all work cohesively together. So that means he had to have determined all 22 before he said, okay, we're going to run with this. Yahi or poof. And that's the words, let there be light or exist light. Yahi or Yahi is Yod Hey Yod. Yeah, but why should that make anything happen? Yod is the 10th letter, and the Hey is the 5th letter, and then the 10th letter again. Why, if the Almighty says 10, 5, 10, or Yod Hey Yod, something should happen? Because he made it that way. The letter Yod is a picture of a working hand. Hey is an expression. And then Yod is a suffix. A working hand again means mine. And the Yod is a prefix, means he will. So I could look at Yod Hey Yod and say it means he or it will express as I intended. Yah, 10:5, Yod Hey, as in Yod Hey Vav Hey, Yahuah, literally is to exist, or he will cause to be expressed. The one who caused it claims it as his own. That's kind of like Yod Hey Yod, which means exist. So he who the Elohim who designed it, thought it up, empowered it to exist. That's Yod Hey Yod, Yahi. What? Light. Well, the light is Aleph-TAV Resh. The first letter, the 6th letter, and the 20th letter. Well, then that means he had to know that the value of Resh before he could say Aleph Vav, but why didn't he say Aleph Hey? Well, he said Vav because Vav is a nail, a hook, a connector. If you screw two pieces of wood together, then that screw is the Vav. The fact that the two pieces of wood are held together, they are Vaved. If I have a bridge or a path in a garden that takes me from the front door to the back door of the garden trail, that path is a Vav. Vav is the concept of being connected. So if Aleph is the concept of being connected to Resh, how is that the word light? Now, in the dictionary, Vav Resh is the word, the essence of the word for light. If I say Mem is the place that something exists, Nun jumps out of Mem. If I say Mem Nun Vav Resh, hey, that's the word menorah. What's a menorah? Well, it's the thing shaped. No. A menorah is anything that emanates light. Nora is the nooning of the or, so we get in English aura or aurora borealis, having to do with the lights. So if you ponder the English words that are very similar to the Hebrew, you'll also, as you contemplate them, you'll see things. You'll be able to see how this all fits together. So if the ironing of the Tav is to understand the meanings of the letters, the placement and the order of the letters. Yeah, but it's hard to remember. I'll show you how to easily remember. But what's the I in Dalet? Well, Dalet is a door. It's the 4th letter. And Yahusha said, I'm the door. Nobody enters my Father's house except through me. And it's like, How do you get to the Father's house? Well, now I know there's people, and whether or not they do it, whether or not they go up to this dimension or that dimension, or they think it's that dimension, it's really that, I don't know. But I know there's people that go up into the heavenlies, whether they're astral projecting or whether it's a spirit ride or whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's woo-woo, whether it's mojo. I couldn't tell you, but I know there's people that do it. And I'm not trying to categorize any one of them. I just know it happens and I've never done it. Okay, but what's the Father's house? Is it a dimension like the second heaven compared to the third heaven or the seventh heaven? Or is it this realm or is it the first? It's like the Father's house. So if I take this concept in English of Yeshua saying, I'm the door to my Father's house, no one enters except through me, then I go, Jesus, can you give me entrance? Yes, I stand at the door and knock. You ask me into your heart, and then I come into your heart house, and then I will give you entrance into my Father's heart house. Is that the way it works? That's kind of Christian doctrine. Quoting Revelation, I stand at the door and knock. If any man opens, I will enter. There's a famous picture of the quintessential Jesus, I think it's a white robe. At evening, there's a house with a door and a lantern, and he's knocking on the door. It's like, okay, well, that's a nice illustration. And somebody said, hey, did you notice there's no door handle on the outside of the house? The door handle's on the inside. See, hey, the artist kind of captured something there. How, if Jesus is the door to his Father's house and nobody can enter except through him, how do you do that? Because that's really important. If you're going to succeed in life, you got to at least do that. If you fail with everything else, you can't do pull-ups and you can't do somersaults and you can't, maybe you're a paraplegic and maybe you're not very smart. Maybe you didn't earn very much money, but if you at least get into the Father's house, your time on earth can be accrued as a success. Success. I got into the Father's house. Well, how do you do that then? How do you enter Jesus if he's the door? There's probably books written on the matter, and there's probably a bunch of doctrines. But I'll tell you what this does that I can answer that question just looking at the alphabet. Yeshua said he's the Dalet. What's the Dalet? The Dalet means door, but it also means, Dalal means to be impoverished. It means to hang down loose and weary and weak. Aleph, Bet, Gimel came before Dalet. So if Aleph is the father, Bet is the universe, Ab is the word father, but Ab is also the word for springtime, youthful vigor, verdure, turning green, and yeah, we want like the month of Abib, Aviv, same word, springtime. Gimel is a verb. That's like an ambassador, a voyager, an explorer. Dalet is a door. Yeah, but on Earth, there's a fourness about Earth. Winter, summer, spring, fall, north, south, east, west, solid, liquid, gas, plasma, 4 states of matter. There's this fourness thing about Earth. So if I think of the Dalet as Earth, and I could say, he is the guy that took on Bet, body, format, embodiment, as compared to the ethereal, spiritual Alephness coming from the heavenlies somehow, somewhere, coming into the universe in material format, being the ambassador, the traveler, the voyager, Gimeler, into Dalet, the earth. But if Dalet's a door and He is the feminine suffix, then I could say he was born of a woman. As the Vav, as the man. He is the feminine suffix, man is the masculine suffix. And he was distinguished. Pilate said, hey, behold this man, Zion Hay, and the word Zion ALEF-TAV both means this. So Zion is to designate specifically, and that's where Pilate put the crown of thorns on him like a halo, and he ripped his back apart like the Roman flail, and then he threw him into a tomb. This man, Pilate, killed, put to the weapon, and threw into the tomb, and in the Roman time, they rolled a round rock in front of the tomb and put a pin in it and held it shut. There's the pin and there's the round rock. So I can say, gosh, the guy, Nicodemus, even was talking to him and said, we know you came from heaven because nobody can do the things you do unless Elohim is with him. And then John chapter 3, Yeshua took over the conversation, and we really don't know what Nicodemus was wanting to talk to him about, unless you could say, well, Yeshua knew, and so he just talked about the stuff he knew Nicodemus wanted to know. But we don't know. That's a presumption. But for Nicodemus to say, we know you came from heaven to earth, that's Aleph-Bet Gimel Dalet. But God is the word that means cloaked, concealed, deceptive, treachery, sneaky-like. So when Yeshua said to his disciples, hey, who do people say I am? Oh, some people think you're Elijah, some people think you're really John the Baptist, and some people think you're some prophet. And he's, who do you say I am? And Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Yeshua said, oh, you're right, but the Holy Spirit must have told you, because I'm in disguise, and nobody could have figured that out. Do we have 5 minutes left? Is that what we got going? Okay, thank you. See, I can look at that story and say that, the fact that that story even exists in the gospel, where Yeshua says, hey, who do people think I am? Don't tell anybody. And Peter declares, and he says, you didn't figure that out, Peter. You must have had a whispering of the, hey, tell him he's the Mashiach, the Son of the living God. And it's like, dude, hey, come on, Ruach, no fair cheating, telling them the answers. Because he was in disguise. It's like, okay, well, that's kind of a story that is like, why was he in disguise? Step away from the narrative now and think about it. Part of the plan, he says, I'm not here doing my own thing. I'm not sneaking around. I'm here on my Father's mission. I'm only doing what I see my Father doing and say what I hear him saying. Why is it in disguise? Because the letter spells Bet Gimel Dalet, BGD, Aleph, I will, I am going to. Now that's this proactive intention of identity and intent doing, I'm going to BGD, I'm going to Bet Gimel Dalet, I'm going to come to the earth in disguise, birthed through the woman's door, pelvis, Dalet, triangle shape, as this man who will then be put to the weapon and die. Wow, that's the first 7 letters. But if you're a Christian, you already know that, don't you? You know the first 7 letters. And you know that, hey, well, the tomb had a round rock rolled in front, and it was, if you didn't know the Romans put a pin in it, it was sealed, it was held, and Yeshua said, hey, I'm doing this. Nobody's taking my life. I'm laying it down. So for him to claim it as his own is the yod, the suffix, meaning you actually know 10 letters. And you know that he was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights, Kaf Lamed Mem Nun Samekhan Pei, and then he resurrected Zadi, and he rose up after 40 days, QOOF, and he's coming back because QOOF is raising up, but it's also coming back. The word kom, kumi, kufav mem, meaning in the dictionary, he's coming back as the exalted one, shining with the blazing, majestic power and glory and might, followed by the hosts of heaven. Sheen, just like he said, Tav. So you know that part of the alphabet too. The only part you're unaware of is how does 3 days and 3 nights be Kaf Lamed Mem Nun and Samekhan Pei? It's the riddle. It's the code. But you see, if you know that when he was put in, he actually died, but he had the power and capacity to prevail and contain it all. That's literally the meaning of the word Yod Kaf Lamed. He will, that's Yod. Kaf Lamed is all, every, each, any. But it's also Yod Kaf Lamed in the dictionary. Look it up. It means power and capacity to prevail and contain it all. So even though he was put to death, he did it because he knew that he was going to blow out the other side and resurrect. But Kaf Lamed Mem is where we get the word calm or calamity, which means he was put to shame and reproach, which means his mortal flesh was degraded and decomposed down to the dust of ruin. Ruin. From dust you were made, from dust you will return. So somehow, even though it was only in there 3 days and 3 nights and he didn't decompose, like a caterpillar going into a chrysalis, decomposing down into a slurry, and then recomposing into a butterfly, mem is liquid, aqueous, nun is birthing out of the mem into Samekhan Pei. And Yeshua said, if a kernel of wheat stays alone, it's just alone, it's itself. But if it dies, there's something about a kernel of wheat dying when it's put into the soil, then it'll resprout and put out this other type of life where it'll bear much fruit. So one corn stalk puts out, let's say if there's a half a dozen ears of corn on it, each ear of corn has, let's just say there's a few hundred kernels of corn. So one kernel of corn put into the ground that sprouts could put out a few thousand duplicates of itself, which means that's the manifold diverging, which is somic ion. The branching, the diversification, the multiplying. To multiply is resh bet, where you get the word rabbi, which is multiplying of either number or essence. So for Yeshua to say, I'm gonna be put into the grave, and I will have the power and capacity to prevail, contain everything, even though it's reproach and shame and degradation, I'm gonna blow through like a piece of wheat, resprouting and come out resurrecting. You know the whole alphabet. There it is. And because that's Yeshua's story, you can iron that dalet. And if you can iron that dalet, you understand that story of Yahusha, keyed to every letter of the alphabet, that's ayin dalet, ayin tav. And this is the time of seeing the ayin dalet, the ayin tav, like two eyes, like the binoculars, ironing the dalet and ironing the tav. And like in a mathematical equation, if you have one variable with two other pieces, you could say the ironing of dalet tav. Do you understand what's dalet tav? Look in the dictionary. It means right, pious, orthodox. The truth. A synonym of that would be ALEF-SHYN resh or YOD-SHYN resh. Like binocular vision, where you can see dimensionally, bring it up close, look at it far away, to be able to comprehend fully in a dimensional capacity the truth, right, pious, orthodox. The QOOF view. If you ayin dalet, ayin tav, that's the time to wake up. And then what do? Well, see, to wake up is Yod Kuf Zadi. The end of something, the end of a direction and turn another direction is Kuf Zadi. Late ripening summer fruits is Kuf Zadi. Daniel 12:4, Gabriel told Daniel, hide the word and seal the book until the time of the end. Ayin dalet, ayin tav, Kuf Zadi. If you think Jesus is a scumbag, an infidel, burning in hell as we speak, like the Jews are taught by their rabbis, you'll never see ayin dalet. If you have no regard of the Hebrew letters and the fact that these letters here in the middle, lining up with being in the tomb, correlate to the Moedim, and the letter Zion and the letter Zadi are reference of the Yom HaShabbat, the seventh-day Sabbath. If you have a Christian can't get that, can't see that, will not accept that understanding, you're one eye blind. The Jews that don't regard Yahusha, misclaimed as Jesus, got the other eye blind. To have both eyes where you can see the letters correlated to the Moedim, which is the gospel narrative story of Yeshua, is to have both eyes seeing what is right, pious, orthodox, which is truth. And because it was Elohim who invented this, it was Elohim who placed the 7 days of creation, Elohim who himself designed the Mishkan and said to Moshe, make the one on earth exactly like the pattern I showed you in heaven. So that means he invented the Mishkan pattern. And he said of the Moedim, these are my witness and testimony ornamentations of who I am and my grandeur. That's ayin dalet. That's the proof that this is all Yahweh Elohim. Yahweh Zavot, the Elohim of Israel. This is all his personal stuff. Right there is the key. So anybody who thinks that the Hebrew alphabet was designed by humans, doesn't see it, doesn't get it. Anybody who thinks that it was copied from Egyptian hieroglyphs doesn't understand the story. But once you see the whole thing, there it is. The QOOF view. Got to take a break.